I'd like to introduce our next chair for this next session. Blair Nixon is the Executive Vice President of Finance at Walton Global Investments. He's been tax counsel to a number of corporations directly involved in the exploration of natural resources. He's also lent his expertise to a number of First Nations groups. I have the pleasure of working with Blair on a regular basis as he is the chair of the Manning Foundation. Blair was born and raised in the North, and it remains near and dear to him. Would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Blair Nixon?
Thank you, Dave. Just by way of overview, we have two distinguished speakers today. Bob Gannicott, he's a geologist with more than 4 decades of experience in the mining industry. Bob has been a director of Dominion Diamond Corporation since its inception in 1992 and currently serves as the company's chairman and CEO. Tapping into his extensive experience in the Northwest Territories and Greenland, Bob has chaired the OSC and the CIMM Committee to establish reporting guidelines for the diamond industry. Our second speaker today is Pierre Gratton. Pierre is the President and CEO of Mining Association of Canada, where he was instrumental in the development and implementation of the association's Towards a Sustainable Mining Initiative. He also spent 3 years as the head of the Mining Association of British Columbia. He's a respected voice in the industry, and Pierre has been honored as a distinguished lecturer by the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum in 2005. Before we welcome these individuals to the podium, I'd just like to touch on what they're going to be addressing today. Natural resource development in the North. This is an area of tremendous importance for Canada, both in the short term and in the long term. When dealing with First Nation, one needs to be cognizant of the duty to consult, traditional territory, settlement lands, reserve lands, and indeed the status of the First Nation that you're dealing with. Are they negotiating or are they settled? The topic is of great interest to me, as Dave just touched on, because I was born and raised in Northern Canada. In my former life, I was both underground and hauled ore at a variety of mines. I have been involved in land claims for 17 years in Northern Canada, and I still have family there, both on the First Nation and non-First Nation side. So it's an area that touches me from a number of different angles and of great importance to Canada. Would you please help me and join me in welcoming our guest speakers?
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and my thanks to the organizers of the convention for giving me the opportunity to speak here. Could I have the slides, please? Thank you. The first slide, then, is a photograph of the Polaris mine as it was located on the north side of Lancaster Sound. The mine is closed now, but it displayed this Canadian flag as a very solid representation of what it represented in terms of industrial activity on the north side of Lancaster Sound. Although we regard Lancaster Sound as being Canadian internal waters, we're almost alone in that. And certainly the United States and most other countries of the world regard it as an international strait. And therefore, the land that's on the other side of it, we have a less strong grip on than we do on the land to the south of it, which is the Canadian mainland. We have no natural communities north of Lancaster Sound. The only community that is there was a transplant from northern Quebec in the mid-1950s, and it was named for the location was named by a Norwegian explorer, as are most of the islands north of Lancaster Sound. The only other activities up there are military, in the sense of alert in the far north of Ellesmere Island, and the things that go along to support alert, which is an uplink station at Eureka and an airstrip at Resolute Bay. But this is an important part of the world for us. The geology is very prospective. The only other activity that's taken place, the only other industrial activity that's ever taken place on the north side of Lancaster Sound was a small oil well that was operated by Pan Arctic Oil for a while, called the Benthorn Well. It's an area that doesn't have any choices about industrial development, any range of choices. There's never going to be a forestry industry here. There's never going to be an agricultural industry here. A lot of the geology in the middle of the middle of the Northwest Territories is Canadian shield, and it's never going to produce a drop of oil or any cubic feet of gas. Mining is the one and only alternative here to express Canadian ownership other than through government. And a reflection of that lack of choice, if you like, is the fact that the capital city of the Northwest Territories, being Yellowknife, is in fact the only capital city in all of Canada that has resulted from mining legacy infrastructure. There was nothing at Yellowknife before the Con mine, a gold mine, arrived in 1935 and was then reinforced by the start of the Giant mine in the early 50s. Yellowknife has grown entirely out of the small service center that sprung up to supply, to aid the development of those two mines. And that is a reflection, once again, of the lack of choice in terms of initial industrial infrastructure in a place like the Northwest Territories. So let's have a look then at what mining does for infrastructure and how it does it. This graph actually shows gold mines in yellow, it has base metal mines in red, and it has the two diamond mines, the two first diamond mines, the big diamond mines, Diavik and Ekati. Those two diamond mines are in the blue symbols. And the x-axis, the axis along the bottom of the graph is scaled in years, the years that the mine actually opened, and the y-axis shows the contribution that those mines have made to infrastructure development. So, for instance, the Con mine over on the right of the slide, scores very highly because it was the initiator of the town of Yellowknife. But it was because it was there a long time. It was also able to see the development of a hydropower project. And in fact, the Giant mine actually then added another hydropower project. And that hydropower now supplies Yellowknife and has done ever since those mines were started. So one thing I think that's clear on that slide is if you had to pick a line that goes through those points as best you can, then it would actually demonstrate that the mines that are open the longest are the ones that have provided the infrastructure development in a lasting way to the community. That sits in contrast to this slide, which actually shows the value of ore, the value of the minerals that have been taken out of the ground as a function of the same measure of infrastructure development. And I think it's just as clear on this slide that there really is no correlation, if any, between the length of time that these mines are open and the amount of valuable infrastructure that they've left behind. So finally then, we can look at when these mines started and the level of infrastructure that they've left behind. And you can see there are some correlations there. The yellow dots, the gold mines, were the earliest ones, and they regress from the top left to the lower right. And then there's a separate line there for base metal deposits because they started later. It wasn't possible to mine base metals anywhere in the Northwest Territories until there was more transportation available. So there are these two regression lines, but here again, it was the early mines, the early starts that left most infrastructure. And I would suggest to you there are two messages in this. One is you have to have mine life if you want to leave something valuable behind. And frankly, in the earlier years when it was easier to just get out there and develop something else alongside the mine like a hydro project, these things got done. It's now much more difficult to do that with the kind of permitting process. I remember when we started the Diavik mine, there was consideration to looking at a big hydropower project then as part of the development, and the conclusion was it would be impossible to permit both the mine and the hydropower project in parallel. It could only be done serially. So that opportunity was missed. So the contrast then, on the left in the blue box, you see a picture of the Calm mine in the city of Yellowknife, and on the right, the Acadie mine in the middle of the Barren Lands. And the fact is that the amount of ore and the value of the ore that was taken out of these mines in Yellowknife over a 65-year period has been extracted by these two diamond mines in the first 2 or 3 years of their operation. That is a measure of the way that the scale of mining has changed and the need to have a high velocity to get an adequate financial return out of things that have become very front-end loaded in their capital. So why has this happened? Well, the image on the left shows two miners working on a drift round in an underground mine, and I can tell you from personal experience that that's going to take them the entire day, and by the time they've finished it, they're going to want nothing else except a big meal and their beds. On the right is a jumbo that's got 2 drill booms on it that are operated by hydraulic rams, and they drill at a phenomenal speed compared to what the men with the air drills could handle. And that one operator in that jumbo is probably going to drill off that face and maybe 2 others in his shift. And when he gets back up to the mine site, he's probably going to go to the gym in the evening to get some exercise, because all he's done is listen to music on his headphones and pull a few levers. So it's a very different proposition now than it was in the past. Also, the scale of mining, as international mining companies, as the mining industry has consolidated internationally over the years, it takes bigger and bigger mines with bigger and bigger amounts of cash flow to have an impact on the balance sheet of these very large international players. So this has led to a mining culture, which we now see in the Northwest Territories, where it hasn't been a question of trying to be there for a long time. It's just because there's so much capital that goes in at the front, so much delay caused by permitting issues, that there has to be a rapid rate of return, and that means high velocity mining. That demands that you get a big crew of people in very quickly. It's almost like a construction site, like always a construction site. Big crew of people in, dig the stuff out of the ground, turn it into cash, tidy it all up properly, and get out and move on to the next project. That has become really the way that the mining business has become to operate. And I question whether that's really serves the community in the best possible way. You know, Jim Prentice mentioned the line that came out of the early years of the tar sands, that the development of resources is not just about getting the money out of the resource itself. The society benefits hugely by the spin-offs that happen for having longer and longer mine lives. The ore bodies were all formed millions, if not billions of years ago. They haven't changed. Only our way of extracting them has changed. So to combat that, if we're going to have significant mine lives, we need to reduce the amount of capital that has to be put in at the front end and the length of time that it has to be exposed to both the risk and the timeline of the very intricate permitting process that has evolved. I'm not an advocate for lax permitting. I just think that the proper application of science and organization should be able to deliver permitting decisions that are carefully considered in a much shorter space of time than they are at the moment. We then have a system that now requires very large reclamation bonds to be placed at the front end of mining operations. For a company like ourselves, we have a market cap of $1.2 billion, 1.2 to 1.3 billion, depending on the day. We have almost a third of that market cap parked in cash as our share of reclamation bonds for the Acadie project and our 40% share of the Diavik project. It's enormous. It would seem to me to be should be more sensible to build these reclamation bonds up over time. At the beginning of a mine's life, all of the equipment is new. If something goes wrong, it can be resold. It's only as the mine matures that the value of the equipment goes down and the cost of the obligation to reclaim goes up. And I believe we should build reclamation bonds in a way that would support that. So the consequence of this is that we no longer have these residential mine sites because everything's mined so quickly it's not worth developing a residential site. It's the fly-in, fly-out, fly-away principle. The Gannicott mine shown in this photograph, which is on the north end of, was on the north end of Bathurst, the north end of one of the Arctic islands, Baffin Island, was actually the last residential site that was ever developed, and it had a 26-year mine life. So we need the industrial development. We must have the industrial development in the north because it's the only way, really, that we can demonstrate our claim to ownership of the north, particularly the Arctic islands. The sovereignty issue, as I state on this slide, that goes along hand in hand with economic activity. And of course, the devolution process is now bringing a lot of that decision-making home to the Northwest Territories, and I loudly applaud that. It means that the people that are making the decisions are people that have a real stake in the result of those decisions. If they make inappropriate environmental decisions, they're going to be held accountable. And if they make inappropriate economic decisions, they are going to suffer, as will their society. So let's have a look then at how this has evolved and how it might evolve over time. This is 1985 in the Northwest Territories. Those are all of the mines. Those flags represent all of the mines that were there. They're all Canadian flags. The Polaris mine that the opening shot was of is the one that's at the top in the center, just above Lancaster Sound. Gannicott mine to the right. Then there was a Lupin gold mine, and the two flags that are at the same level are the Com mine and the Giant mine. And then Pine Point mine, very large lead zinc mine on the south shore of Great Slave Lake below it, all owned by Canadian corporations. 3 of those mines all owned by one Canadian corporation. It was Cominco Limited. At the time, it was part of Canadian Pacific. This is the situation today. These are the only mines that are active in the Northwest Territories. The company that I'm the chairman and CEO of, with the Canadian flag. All the rest are companies that are actually run out of the UK. And I often joke to people that this is sort of like going backwards to the days of when the Hudson's Bay Company owned all of the lands with waters draining into Hudson's Bay. Perhaps I'm allowed to say that. I come from the UK originally. But it's a long time ago, by the way. We now look forward to the future. These are the mines that are really under stages of development where they're actually likely to go ahead. The reason I faded out our Canadian flag is because, in the future we will, like every other mine, eventually we're going to run out of ore. So there'll be one of the diamond mines left. It's a small one, owned by De Beers, so run out of London, or maybe Luxembourg if you want to be really strict about it. A Swiss company, which is Xstrata, which is now part of Glencore, which has a base metal deposit in the middle of the Barren Lands, and then a Chinese company that owns the 2 bigger base metal deposits in the middle of the Barren Lands and one up closer to the Arctic coast. So you can see the Canadian presence here since 1985 has become hugely diluted, and it doesn't look like improving in the future. This is, although you might think I'm making an argument for economic nationalism, it's not really that, although I don't entirely disapprove of that. The argument really is about specialization. This is a tender part of Canada. We have Aboriginal communities that are diverse, that still have sensitivities about, some of them have completed land claims negotiations with Ottawa, some haven't. It's a very complex environment politically. It's a place for people that want to be specialized in being in the North, understanding the North, and staying there to see it through. Not for people to come in from the outside, and by the time they've picked up any appreciation of the North, they're being moved on, transferred on as regional managers or whatever. This is a place for specialists, a place for people that understand it. We've put a big effort into that. The only operations that we have are in the Northwest Territories. They're both diamond mines, so we understand the diamond business very well. We all come out of the Northwest Territories. We all live in the Northwest Territories. Our entire upper management lives in Yellowknife. And we've done a really good job of employing local people, and not just employing them, but actually advancing them so that there's a route to real senior advancement that can be seen for other Aboriginal young people that are contemplating joining this kind of life. We've done a lot of work up there. You know, we are spending, we don't have a strong revenue stream off one of the mines. We do off of the other. And we're basically reinvesting all of those earnings into the development of new deposits up there to extend mine life and to give us a long earning stream in the future. As I say, we're making a specialty out of hiring and training northern people. We offer scholarship programs. And we now have a new project that we believe can extend the Acadie mine from its anticipated closure in 2019 for a further probably 20 years, certainly another 10 or 11 years as an open pit, and probably a further 9 or 10 years beyond that as an underground mine. So this is what the Acadie mine looks like today. And this is everything that will have to be taken apart and moved out of there in another 4 or 5 years from now if we don't extend this project. But we believe we can extend the project. We're well into achieving that. And if we do, it's my dream that we make it look like that Polaris mine that we saw at the beginning, with a very big Canadian maple leaf painted on the top of the process plant in the middle of the barren lands, as an assertion of the sovereignty that we all believe in for this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. As they get my presentation up, just a couple of quick comments. You know, in Nunavut, there is a Canadian flag. It's the Meadowbank mine owned by Agnico Eagle. So there's another Canadian flag there. But I also, it made me, your talk reminded me of a story. It was a number of years ago when I was also with the Mining Association of Canada, and Breakwater Resources, which was at that time the owner of the Nanisivik mine, and they were in the process of decommissioning, and they had a port that had been built to service the mine. And they were involved in decommissioning, and they thought, well, you know, here we've got a deep water port in the far Arctic. Do you think the government would take it from us for $1 and have a port? That, you know, they'd have to maintain it, but they'd have a port. They wouldn't have to build one, rather than have us decommission the port. Sadly, at the time, the government couldn't figure out how to handle that, didn't know what to do, so couldn't make a decision. So the port was not bought for $1, and instead it was decommissioned and taken down. Today, taxpayers' dollars are building a port at Nanisivik because it's been recognized it'd be very good to have a port in that far part of the Arctic. So mining, and it's an ironic story, but it's just a reminder of the infrastructure that mining brings to remote areas in particular. And Bob's presentation touched on this, but I think we need to think about how do you, and I really want to copy that presentation because some really good ideas on how you can try to incentivize development in the far north. But also what we've thought about at the Mining Association is mining projects often build infrastructure that provides significant public benefits as well. The Meadowbank mine in Nunavut provided an all-winter road to Baker Lake, which before then never had one. Right now they're expected to decommission that road when it's over, and they'll lose their winter road. That really doesn't make sense. And we need to think about how we do that, how we factor that into reclamation bonding, and so on. So with that, am I up? I am up. So there's your mine, by the way. Yeah. So first, who we are. So I represent the Mining Association of Canada. We're the national organization representing the mining industry. We represent the producers. Many of you may know there's a huge conference in Toronto next week, the PDAC convention. 30,000 odd people will descend on Toronto from all over the world. That's a different group. They represent the explorers. We represent largely the producers of Canada's minerals and metals, with a with members operating all across the country, producing a wide range of commodities, including diamonds. And I won't spend too much time here because you've already seen a variation on this, but this just sort of shows you the 4 mines currently operating in the Northwest Territories. And most of my talk will focus on the NWT as opposed to all of the North, though I'll be making some comments on about the North in general. I want to focus on the contribution that the industry makes. It's the largest private sector employer in the NWT. Bob has already made that point as well. But from the discovery of diamonds in 1991 to 2008, the gross domestic product of the NWT essentially tripled. In the North, mining is the largest employer of all workers, including Aboriginal workers, and does more business with Aboriginal companies than any other industry. And Bob has already touched on the infrastructure contribution that comes from mining, but it is very, very significant. And the mines are largely responsible for a lot of the workforce development and training that takes place in the North. Done, I must say, often in partnership with the 2 levels of government through what has been a very innovative program called the Mine Training Society, which has served as a model for many other organizations across the country that are now doing amazing work, helping to facilitate and accelerate the participation of Aboriginal people in the mining sector. So this just shows a little bit about the value of NWT mining production or across the North, but you can see the large bar, the blue bar, is the Northwest Territories. So it really is the dominant territory when it comes to mining by a fairly significant degree. You are seeing in the red a nice growth in Nunavut. That is the Meadowbank mine, essentially. It's the one operating mine that they have. There's another one that's in development, and Agnico Eagle has its sights on a second gold mine of their own. We've also seen, as you see in the yellow, an increase in the Yukon, and there's a story here that also ties to the NWT. The Yukon, back in the early 2000s, 80%, I believe, of their GDP was public service. They had almost no private industry left. There was an exodus of people. The mining industry had been driven into the ground. There was no interest in developing or exploring in the Yukon. Then came devolution, and it was virtually overnight. Once decision-making was brought to the people who cared about decisions and who cared about the consequences of those decisions, and once some major land claims were settled, everything started to fall into place. And now you have a number of new mining operations in the Yukon, and the prospects for further growth are very encouraging. So I think, we're going to see with the devolution agreement in the NWT a lot more hope and a lot more interest and appetite for new mining development there. Part of why people want mines is because we also contribute to governments to help pay for social services. And this here is just an example of the diamond mining taxes that have flowed into government coffers over the years. Of course, most of this has come down here to Ottawa, and that's about to change, as we saw yesterday. There will be much more flowing up north. I remember once we had a meeting with the federal government organized, and the then president of the Acadie mine, this was a number of years ago, came down for this meeting, and he decided to bring with him the latest royalty deposit. I don't think I've ever seen that many zeros on a check, but it was into the hundreds of millions of dollars, and he wanted to personally hand it over to the appropriate public servant over at INAC, or ANSI. So that was something else. It's been mentioned that we're the largest private sector employer in the NWT economy. This is at 16%. This is smaller than it used to be. But I would point out that this is actually a good thing, and it's because, and I think mining is partly responsible for the fact that it's smaller, in that mining has enabled the growth and diversification of the NWT economy because of how development has been approached through the diamond mines over the last 15 to 20 years. And it shows that you don't want an economy that's thoroughly dependent on just one sector, and that's very hard to manage in a jurisdiction where there isn't a lot else. But you've seen a diversification take place, nonetheless, that I think is really quite healthy. Industry is also pretty important as a contributor to social development and to supporting communities, and we've seen, again, over the same time frame, some $100 million in community benefits through a wide range of initiatives, from sponsorships, community centers, scholarships, training, recreation facilities, and payments through impact benefit agreements. And also, as I mentioned before, through education and training, and there's many different forms that this takes. There's on-site training, there's training through the Mine Training Society, and a variety of other mechanisms where the diamond industry has really helped, I believe, contribute, and it's not, they don't get all the credit for this, but I think the diamond industry has really helped to contribute to what I consider to be a very significant transformation of the NWT population. I recall seeing a slide, this is a number of years ago, and I'd love to see this study updated, but it just showed the level of post-secondary education amongst Aboriginal Canadians in the NWT, and it had just, I mean, the curve was just soaring up. It went from about 2 before the first diamond mine opened into the thousands in a very, very short period of time. And again, this also is reflective of how our diamond mines in the north have approached their engagement with local communities and helping to ensure that they are full partners and full beneficiaries of the opportunities that mining brings. This is not always how the industry operated. It is how we operate today, or for the most part endeavor to operate. And this is another example. If you look at the Aboriginal businesses serving the NWT mining industry, 15 years ago there were less than a handful of Aboriginal companies that could do business with the mines. Today there are over 50. Some, though not all of them, are on this slide. And let me just focus on one of them for a moment, the Tlicho Investment Corporation. 23 member companies, 450 employees, over $180 million in annual revenues. This is part of the diversification I'm talking about. This is a company now that can provide services to a wide range of other companies, and they can reach beyond in the NWT's borders. This is a very successful company that is going places, and it's all been developed over the last number of years. Part of it was also, I think, and the diamond mines played a role in helping to build the internal capacity to develop these companies and then to thrive. And now I know it's a tremendous source of pride for Aboriginal people in the north. The Tlicho Logistics received one of the prestigious awards provided by the PDAC every year, the Skookum Jim Medal for Aboriginal Business Success, so they've also been recognized as a leader in our industry. There's tremendous potential going forward. It's a highly prospective region. As the Conference Board of Canada has already said, overall the northern metal and non-metallic mineral output is expected to grow by some 91% between 2011 to 2020. This was written before the current downturn. Maybe they'd revise it somewhat, but it's still, I think, reasonable to assume that there's a lot of potential for new growth. And we've got a number of new major projects currently in permitting or in environmental assessment. But you can't take it for granted. investment is mobile. In the time that I've been involved in this industry, we've always said this, and I think a lot of people, communities, and governments for a long time discounted this. It's just a threat that industry makes. We say we'll take our money elsewhere and go if you don't accelerate permitting or do this or do that, and you know, governments would call our bluff sometimes. I just want to make the point that it is much more true today, if it wasn't then, and I would say it was then, but it's even more so the case now, because of how our industry is consolidated and how there are now some very, very large multinational players in the industry, including those operating in the NWT with the exception of Dominion Diamonds. They have many, many, many projects to choose from. They don't have to go and invest here. They can invest somewhere else. In the past, you know, the Canadian industry was held and operated by smaller Canadian companies that had fewer options. So they were perhaps less mobile than the global mining industry is today. And I think that's something that we all have to keep in mind and to ensure that Canada remains an attractive place for new investment. And unfortunately, over the last few years, the NWT has been lagging. And maybe this has been, you know, the problem of abundance. They've had it so well, they haven't felt a need to develop more, and projects have really moved forward at a fairly glacial pace in some instances. And as a consequence, we've seen a fall off in mineral exploration. We're here, this is very much contrast with the previous graph I had before, where NWT is the blue at the bottom compared to the other jurisdictions in terms of exploration spending. Though I would say that those numbers have been increasing and increased this past year, and that's probably due to your company, Bob. But we are seeing a bit of a turnaround in the NWT, and that's encouraging. And it's my belief that with devolution, we will see that also come back again because of what's happened in the Yukon. I think that there will be people will just be much more interested in what's going to happen in their backyard when they're the ones making the decisions regarding that. But we do have a bit of a tall order. Replacing the diamond mines is not easy. If you look at the 6 projects here currently under review and development, all of them combined equal the jobs that would be lost were Ekati to close. And we've got here 2019, and of course this was an old date before you acquired the company. So Ekati is not going to close then, but that was the timeline that was initially envisioned. But we have a company that's looking to prolong and also grow the company's interest through other kimberlite deposits in the area. So this is a bit of an old slide, but it tells the story. This is all, and all mines do end. So it is not easy to, it will not be easy to unless we really get focused to ensure that the kind of support to the NWT economy that has come from mining continues. But we are seeing improvements underway, and there's a number listed here, both by the federal government, through regulatory reform, the settlement of land claims, devolution, as I mentioned. I keep coming back to that. I think that's really, really important. And the NWT government is really getting ready for this and have developed a new mineral development strategy, putting in place what's required to ensure that the industry is developed sustainably. And this just touches more. There's been investments in education, in training, in geoscience in the north, and moves to address some of the long-standing concerns regarding the regulatory process in the north. It's our view that it's incomplete, that there's more work to do, but this just highlights some of the changes to the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act that it's, I think, just passed by Parliament. Have to check. And they are improvements. It doesn't go as far as or address all of the issues we put forward, but nevertheless, it should improve matters. And as I mentioned, the NWT government is helping as well to prepare for devolution. And so are Aboriginal communities. The Twitcho government has created the Quebe Working Group. It's a first point of contact for exploration in the mining industry, which helps build those relationships with communities on mining issues from the very beginning. And you'll hear our industry say this all the time. It's vitally important that that first contact be good, because it's a lot harder to repair relationships after if it doesn't start off well. So part of ensuring that that happens is it's not just what the industry does, it's also communities being ready and knowing what they want. And these kinds of steps by the Twitcho are also really important, helping industry understand what their priorities are and how they want to develop their own region and in what way. I'll just close with one last point around infrastructure. It will always be a challenge in the NWT or in Nunavut. There's just not a lot of it. What there is has been largely brought about by mining. But we need to think long and hard about this. If we don't sort of change the equation on how infrastructure is built, the opportunities in the north will remain more limited. I was talking before this with about what happened in British Columbia a few years ago when the Conservative government wisely, in my view, invested in the Northwest Power Line in British Columbia and supported the province in building and extending a power line up in northwestern BC, which is a highly prospective area for mining. And later this year, the first mine, the Red Chris mine, will open. 750 new high-paying jobs and royalties will start flowing in a few years, and a lot of the indirect business benefits that come from that. We need to think strategically about that. Where do we need to be focusing our infrastructure investments in the north to ensure we can capitalize on the opportunities mining can bring? Because there is a lot of potential. There are a number of projects being explored and developed and pursued in the NWT, and this just shows you some of them. Some of them more advanced than others. The Prairie Creek mine is really now finally in its final stages. It's been a very long road for it, but it is proceeding, and others, we hope, will follow. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Bob and Pierre. Just to touch on a couple of the topics that actually overlapped, you've mentioned the challenges with permitting, you've mentioned the challenges with regulatory. An open question for both of you is, how can we better address that as a community in terms of both the territorial governments and federal government to the extent they are involved, and indeed the First Nations? Permitting is maybe one area.
Yeah, it's a subject that's close to me at the moment, permitting this project, as you know. I mean, the things are, of course, there's now one water board that's being established instead of the diverse one, so that it brings, the Northwest Territories does not have a large population, so the talent pool for the people that are interested in doing jobs like that is not so large. It's enough to staff one board really well, but it's more difficult when you've got many diverse boards. So that's certainly a step in the right direction. I think the other thing is that the process itself we could compress, and that to permit sensibly, we need to gather scientific information. We need to gather the opinions of people that represent traditional knowledge in the communities. We need to put those two together, make a proposal, and have it assessed by one group that would presumably be the water board. At the moment, we have a process that requires extensive meetings with various aspects of the community that are normally, frankly, not well attended. There isn't that sort of the level of community interest that you might expect in it, and it takes up a lot of time. As you can imagine, for us, we've got 5 impacted groups, but if we look at where everybody lives, there are in fact 10 communities that we have to visit every time we want to hold a public meeting. None of these are connected by roads, and they're all very long way apart. It typically takes us about 2 weeks to get through one set of community meetings with these 10 different groups. So by the time you multiply that by, we've already done 4 sets of meetings, and we've not yet even filed the permitting document. But there'll probably be 20 meetings of that type before we get through this. And you know, it's expensive and it's very time consuming. And of course, as you would appreciate, in the meantime, a lot of the expense that's gone at the front end of actually assessing the project, gathering environmental information, becomes a capital that is parked at the front end of the project, still at risk, and has to be taken through this long timeline before you actually start to get a return from it. And as I point out, that is what really almost forces, you know, in any economic model, it forces that you then produce at a high velocity at the beginning. Doesn't make economic sense to actually produce in a more gentle way, because even if you said, well, we'll do a small mine, lower capital cost, and we'll produce over a longer period of time, and that will give us a good rate of return. But we've got so much money that's already gone up at the front end, and the reclamation bonds. You have to be getting it back quickly. It mandates rapid extraction, and that basically removes the benefit of having a long lifetime project on which a community can build its own infrastructure and its own educational talent pool around. Yeah.
Well, it's an issue that's relevant both north and south, but some of the challenges we face comes from the different federal agencies that participate in and contribute and ask questions regarding proposed mining projects, and it's coordinating the federal family that can often be a challenge. I think some of the changes in the south to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act are getting at that. I'd suggest that the job's not done yet. It's not legislative change perhaps that's going to fix it, it's going to be experience. And I think we have a new system that's going to make it easier to acquire that experience, because in the past, well, we're now going to be building, I think, a body of expertise that knows how to review mines. It used to change in the past from department to department. You could have a different regulator or a different department in charge of environmental assessments in the south. Now it's in one place, so there's the hope anyway that they will build that kind of expertise over time. But it's coordinating the federal family that I think is important. But there's another aspect as well. We need to think about project review, not just as the EA. The EA is only one portion. There's then subsequent permitting. And a lot of the information that is needed for permitting is provided in the EA, and we need to better integrate how those two go together, and then I think we'll see some streamlining. That doesn't at all involve a reduction in requirements, but it does, you know, I think by better integrating the questions and the information requirements in EA, you should be able to streamline and accelerate permitting, which would make a big difference.
Come on, just one more go. It's because I'm thinking, especially keeping in mind that I'm in Ottawa and I have to safely get through the airport yet. I would say that I was around for the permitting of the Diavik project back in 1996 to 2000, and I'm now undertaking this project. And the difference in dealing with the levels of the regulatory bodies has changed no end. It's been a huge improvement. And I'm very appreciative of that. There's a long way to go, but there's certainly been a big improvement.
Just want to ask one more question, then I'll provide the opportunity for the audience to ask questions. But you've mentioned devolution, and you also mentioned the opportunity that the government had, I think probably the federal government, in terms of the Deepwater port. Do we need better coordination between government and industry? And is devolution something that is going to assist that? Or do we need to help it along in terms of providing some infrastructure itself?
Do you want to?
No, the reason I was smiling is because, of course, the Deepwater port is not, contemplated in the Northwest Territories. It's in Nunavut. So, anyway, yeah.
I'll just add one more fact, a bit of context. When I was growing up as a teenager, there was a potential mine in Mary River at the bottom of Millen Inlet. It was talked about then. I think it's still an active, or potential mine that's actively being discussed from time to time. A deepwater port might accommodate that, although it's over on the other side of the northern part of Baffin Island. But just a question to put it into context.
Well, I guess I'll go to the BC example and then come back to the NWT. The extension of the power line in northwestern BC, there had been an awful lot of, it was known that there were a number of potential mines up there that were rich geologically, but they weren't going to be built because power was too expensive. They were too remote. You were going to have to bring in diesel. Diesel's expensive, and you have to put it in containers, and you have to, there's an awful, it raises the capital costs of projects significantly when you have to do that. So you need a larger, higher value deposit to build a mine in a remote location when you're reliant on diesel. If you have access to the grid, that improves the economics. That's just power. Then there's roads, then there's port facilities. In the Northwest Territories, we have an ice road. Everybody's seen the wonderful photos. The Americans even ran a TV show about the ice road at one point. It's quite an amazing feat that the diamond industry has built and operated now for years. But as we've seen at times, there's been some close calls with weather. We can have warmer winters, and if you don't get your supplies up, because that's the one time of the year when you get your supplies up for the year. So in the absence of a permanent road, those mines are potentially put at risk. But it also shows that, in the absence of a permanent road, you're preventing other projects potentially from being built. In the case of diamonds, you fortunately get to fly out the product. But if you're looking at a base metal mine, you can't put it, in a briefcase and take it to Europe. So you need more infrastructure. So you need to look at, and there's been a lot of talk in the NWT about now I'm going to forget the name. What's the Bathurst Road and Port, I guess?
Yeah, Bathurst Inlet Port.
Of a project that would go up and a port up at Bathurst Inlet. It's been studied for years. It's been advanced for years, but it's still waiting to be built. That project or some other, and now with Nunavut, a lot of the interest in Nunavut. There's a number of prospective base metal mines there as well, but they're sort of scattered like this. So what's the right route that can actually enable the multiple mines to potentially, not all at once, but that potentially create the possibility for a number of mines to come on stream over time.
Thank you. I'd just like to provide the audience with an opportunity. We've got a few minutes left. Are there any questions that you'd like to pose? Yes. It's a pitcher opportunity. Hearing none, I'll just... Yes, sir.
I have a question. It's not the Northwest Territories, but I'm a shareholder in Taseko. Would the panel like to address that situation as to the environmental assessment that was refused this week in Ottawa? I wish the Minister of Northern Development was on the stage. I'd like to ask him. I think there's a mixed message here, and it's very frustrating. Would anyone like to talk to that?
Well, it's the 7th largest copper gold deposit, I think, in the world. And would have brought an awful lot of economic benefits to a region that needs it. It's a region that's been very hard hit by the mountain pine beetle and has seen its forestry industry go into significant decline. We certainly had hoped that the project would be approved because we think it would have, and I know that it's a project that's faced significant opposition from First Nations, which I consider to be really tragic because It's a region where I think if it had been built, First Nations would have been amongst the greatest beneficiaries because of how mines are built today. But they, I guess, have to feel that way, right? They have to want that, and they have to be at a point in their community development where they can see that opportunity. And in this particular case, they didn't, and so there was very, very strong opposition that seemed intractable. I also felt that, you know, part of the challenges there on the First Nations side are historic. There's been a historically bad relationship between them and governments for years. It's not something that industry can always on its own overcome. I've often thought when thinking about this particular project of Voisey's Bay, there was a point in Voisey's Bay development where the mine's employees were surrounded by Innu, I think it was the Innu, armed with guns and told to get off the land. It was a very, very tense situation, and the project at that time did not proceed. What happened subsequently is the provincial and federal governments stepped in, worked hard, negotiated land claims agreements with the Innu and the Inuit. Today, Voisey's Bay is, like the diamond mines in the north, is one of the best examples of Aboriginal participation in the country. It's a success story that everybody points to now and wants to learn from, but it required that front end first before the company could then come in and take it the next step. So, you know, looking towards the future, because there's nothing we can do now, the government's made its decision, but looking towards the future, such a significant deposit has to be built, will be built someday. It's got to be, and I hope it's not too long from now because I think the region needs it. But maybe we have to be thinking more broadly about how do we get to yes, and who needs to do what.
Thank you very much for that question. We're at the end of our time today, and I would just like to wrap up the session. It's now time for the coffee break that's sponsored by the Mining Association of Canada. Please be back in the room at 4 o'clock as we have a plenary session. And I would just like to thank both Pierre and Bob for just an excellent presentation, very informative. And we look forward to further developments in this area over the next few years and decades. Just to turn back to the plenary session, we'll have Danielle Smith, Tim Hudak, Brian Palliser, and Mike Harris. So please join us. Thanks very much, gentlemen.